The first place I went to was the book we've been using in class, Judith Langer's book. And what I was really looking at there, she has the concept of creating envisionments. Basically, that so much of reading involves this internal world we create, these envisionments, and yet envisionments can be so difficult to create without a proper understanding of the context of a work. And so if envisionments are key to students understanding literature and yet they rely on context, then we can see how student motivation would be hampered by a lack of understanding of context. They just wouldn't understand the book. Langer has this analogy she uses of a cocktail party where basically students coming into English with their sort of limited knowledge of context are like people jumping into the middle of a cocktail party and everyone's chatting and they're just picking up bits and pieces of conversation, and yet they have no like wider context to understand what all these sort of conversations are about. And so, us being the teachers of in these English courses, we have an understanding, larger understanding of the context, and yet we can neglect that in preparing our students, assuming they have the same sort of contextual knowledge we have to just jump into a novel. The next thing I found was something called the affective filter. And so basically, there was a study of second language learners that showed that those that were experiencing anxiety or low self-confidence actually were not in their brain retaining the knowledge that was being put out in classrooms. And so being in an anxious state or having low self-confidence was actually if they were in that environment in the classroom, it was blocking them from retaining knowledge. It actually wasn't storing in their brain. And so a high affective filter means that because of your current affect, when you're hearing this knowledge, it's actually blocking you from retaining what you need to learn. Whereas someone with a low affective filter, if they're confident, if they're not anxious, their brain is actually prepared to store the information that they're learning. Another concept I found was the idea of scaffolding. And basically scaffolding is this teaching idea. It's quite popular, but it's basically just about scaffolding student knowledge. And so it involves this sort of cycle of preparation before you sort of go into giving content. You prepare students for that content. You give them context for the content so that when they receive the content, they've already sort of got like a base built up for that kind of knowledge. That knowledge can be stored in the proper way so that they can understand that knowledge. And then after that, you go into affirmation, where when students are putting this knowledge to use, after you've prepared them and given them the knowledge, you affirm them in their efforts. And this process of affirmation will help improve student motivation, but also just their involvement and their sense of self and their self-confidence with the material, and help them understand it in that way.